He never died. He simply stopped being remembered. Deep in the attic of an aging American farmhouse, tucked inside a rotting leather-bound album, a 7-year-old girl discovered a photograph her family had worked generations to forget. His eyes were still alive in the image, sharp, calculating, almost aware. No one dared speak his name, not even her grandmother, who snatched the photo with a gasp and whispered, "We do not talk about him." But what if silence is what brought him back? What if this wasn't just a forgotten relative, but a forbidden legacy tied to a haunted bloodline, to an unspoken name that echoes through time? This isn't just a ghost story, it's a history that refuses to stay buried. Aurelia Wythe was 7 when she found the photograph that fractured everything. It wasn't framed, wasn't labelled, just wedged between 2 brittle album pages like it had buried itself there. The man in the photo didn't smile. His suit looked old pre-war, but his eyes, they looked present, alive, watching. When Aurelia showed the image to her grandmother, the reaction was immediate and violent. "No!" she hissed. "We don't say his name. We don't ask. Ever." Her hands trembled as she tore the photo away, folded it in half and locked it in the drawer she once kept her husband's war medals. That was the first time Aurelia noticed something no one ever talked about. Every family has one photograph they pretend never existed. But this one was beginning to breathe. And the silence around his name was about to unravel something buried far deeper than memory. Some names are not forgotten, they're erased. It started on an ordinary summer afternoon, the kind where the air feels thick with history, and the walls of old houses seem to hum with things unsaid. Aurelia Wythe had been playing hide-and-seek with no one in particular, wandering the dusty upper floor of her grandmother's ancestral home in Maine, a creaking structure older than the town itself. The attic door had always been stuck sealed shut by time or intention, but that day it opened without resistance, almost as if it had been waiting. Inside, the light was amber, stained by decades of grime and half-melted beeswax candles. And in that gloom she found the album. Not on a shelf, not in a chest, just there on a small wooden chair, positioned directly beneath a boarded-up window. She opened it without thinking, flipping through sepia-toned faces, until one stopped her cold. He was standing in a field she recognized. His eyes were locked on the camera. But the photo, it felt wrong, not damaged, not fake, just impossible. And in that single frozen stare, she felt a strange pressure in her chest, like the room itself had inhaled. This wasn't just an old picture. This was a warning someone had failed to destroy. The moment she showed the photo, everything changed. Aurelia didn't know why she brought it downstairs. Maybe she needed someone to confirm it was real, or maybe some part of her had already begun to sense the silence wasn't natural. Her grandmother, Edith Wythe, was halfway through polishing a silver medallion when she saw it. The way her hands froze mid-motion, the cloth dropping like a curtain, told Aurelia more than words ever could. "Where did you get this?" Her voice wasn't angry, it was scared, shaken. Edith took the photo gently, as if it might burn her fingers. For several seconds she said nothing. Then she muttered more to the walls than to Aurelia. "He told me I'd forget. And I did. Until now." She folded the photo once, twice, tucked it into a drawer behind an old Bible and locked it with a key Aurelia had never seen before. "You must never say his name," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Names give memory. Memory gives power." That night the house felt different. The wind had a weight to it. Floorboards creaked with no footsteps. and sometime after midnight, Aurelia swore she heard humming from the attic, the exact tune her grandmother used to hum, but hadn't sung in over 30 years. You can lock a photo in a drawer, but you can't stop it from being remembered. Over the next few days, something began to shift. Not suddenly, not violently, but like a fog rolling in, quiet, gradual, inescapable. Aurelia couldn't stop thinking about the man in the picture. She hadn't seen a name, no caption, no date. But the expression on his face, the unnatural stillness in his posture kept replaying in her head like a silent scream. Every corner of the house began to feel unfamiliar. Mirrors showed shadows that didn't match movement. The old grandfather clock ticked slower at night. And one morning every framed photo in the hallway tilted left and only left. Her grandmother refused to speak about it again. It's not our story, she'd say. It's his. But when Aurelia asked who he was, Edith's face collapsed into something she didn't recognize, shame or grief or both. Then came the dream, clearer than waking life. She was standing in that same field from the photograph, but this time the man was walking toward her. No blood, no violence. Just a question in his eyes. And when he opened his mouth to speak, Aurelia woke up with his name on the tip of her tongue. Except it wasn't a name she'd ever learned. It was one she'd always known. Some legacies aren't passed down, they're hidden, waiting to be found. Days after the attic incident, Aurelia returned alone. Not out of defiance, but obsession. Something in that room had taken root in her, a question that pulsed louder than fear. This time the album was gone, but in its place, beneath a loose floorboard, she uncovered something far older. A faded red journal, bound in cracked leather, its pages warped from age and secrecy. The initials on the first page weren't hers, but the handwriting felt familiar. What she read inside didn't just unsettle her, it unraveled her family's history. Because it wasn't just a record, it was a confession, and it was signed with the same name her grandmother refused to speak. But what made the journal truly disturbing wasn't what was written. It was what hadn't aged. The ink was fresh. The story stopped mid-sentence. And the last page had a note dated 2 days ago, in handwriting that matched Aurelia's exactly. This wasn't a journal of the past. It was a message to the present. And whoever wrote it somehow already knew what she'd find next. The past doesn't whisper, it echoes when you're alone. Aurelia sat cross-legged on the attic floor, staring at the journal that should not have existed. The cover, though aged, carried warmth like skin, as if it had been waiting to be touched again. When she flipped through the pages, she expected history, dusty dates, old regrets. But what she found was immediate, visceral. The entries described things that hadn't yet happened, thoughts she hadn't yet had. She will find me when the air stills, and the house forgets its own name. That sentence froze her. Not because it was poetic, but because it was exactly what she felt, like the house itself had gone blank the moment she stepped into the attic again. Lights dimmed quicker. The silence buzzed. And worst of all, she couldn't shake the feeling that someone was reading her. She touched her own handwriting, the final line in the journal, the one she didn't remember writing. I opened the door. He was already inside. How could a book know her future, unless something inside it wasn't bound by time? And if that's true, if this journal sees ahead, then what else is already written that she hasn't lived yet? What if the haunting isn't in the house, but in your memory? As Aurelia read deeper into the journal, the entries became more personal, more disturbingly intimate. It wasn't just about the man in the photo anymore, it was about her. her childhood fears, her habits, her dreams. She counts the stairs every night. She stops at 13. She always stops at 13. That line hit her like a punch. It was something she had done since she was 5, never told anyone, never thought it mattered. Yet it was written here in ink that hadn't faded. Suddenly reality felt soft around the edges, like her memories were being read instead of remembered. Was someone watching her life from the outside, or had this presence always been inside, shaping her thoughts before they were hers? She flipped the page in panic. There, scribbled quickly and slanted, a new line appeared as she watched. "You're not alone. Stop reading." But she didn't stop. She couldn't, because if this journal was reacting now in real time, then it wasn't a relic, it was a mirror, a living archive. And if her mind was being read, the question that now haunted her wasn't who wrote this, but how much of her was ever really her own. Some truths don't wait to be discovered, they wait to be remembered. On the third night, Aurelia brought the journal to her bedroom, unable to sleep without it near. She told herself it was just paper and ink, just a relic from a damaged lineage. But around 3:33 a.m, she woke up cold, her breath visible despite the summer heat. The journal had moved. It now rested on her chest, open to a page that hadn't existed before. It read, "Do not trust the mirror." She turned toward her vanity instinctively and froze. Her reflection blinked a full second after she did. Not late. Wrong. Her heart slammed in her chest as she realized something deeper. It wasn't copying her anymore. It was watching her. That night, her room was no longer hers. The walls felt closer, as if they were leaning in. Her posters, her photographs, even the ceiling fan, they felt staged, artificial, like set pieces in someone else's idea of her life. Was this her house, or was she walking through a carefully constructed memory built by something older than she could comprehend? And if so, what happens when the architect wants her to remember what he remembers? It wasn't her fear that fed him. It was her curiosity. By the 4th day, the house no longer felt like it belonged to the Wythe family. Walls whispered, clocks reversed, and Aurelia couldn't tell if she was remembering things wrong or remembering them too clearly. The journal had stopped updating, but something else had started, a scratching, soft but rhythmic, behind the attic walls. Not rats, not pipes. Something waiting. And with every night that passed, it got closer. What was once an echo of the past was becoming a presence in the present. And Aurelia knew whatever was watching her had finally decided to be seen. It's not the house that's haunted. It's her blood. Aurelia tried to pretend things were normal. She smiled at breakfast. She helped in the garden. But beneath every quiet moment was a pressure, like the house was holding its breath. The scratching in the attic became pounding. Not random, 3 knocks, pause, 3 more. Always at the same hour, 3:33 a.m. Her grandmother, once firm and composed, now stared blankly at walls, lips moving in silent prayer. Aurelia asked about the man again this time, not as a child asking questions, but as someone caught in his story. Edith finally answered with tears in her eyes. He was my brother, but he wasn't born like us. He remembered things that hadn't happened. He said time was folding. He said we were just echoes. Then he disappeared. The photo was the last time we saw him. And now Aurelia realized the journal wasn't his voice calling to her, it was hers, written through him, or by him. Whatever this was, it wasn't just about the past. It was an infection passed down through blood, waiting for someone who could remember backwards. And she was the first one since him to hear the knocking. When reality bends, logic becomes a trap. Aurelia began hearing her name whispered from corners she hadn't entered, not allowed inside, like thoughts that didn't belong to her. The walls started warping subtly, pictures curving doors, narrowing by inches she couldn't measure but felt. One night she found herself in the attic again, without knowing how she got there. The journal was open, the ink was fresh, and this time it wasn't in English. It looked like glyphs curling symbols that pulsed when she stared too long. But she understood them. Not by translation, by recognition. She'd seen these symbols in childhood drawings she didn't remember making. The journal now had a map sketched on its final page, one she followed through the house like a ritual. Each step matched a specific memory: her mother's funeral, the burnt wallpaper in the hall, the night she got sick in 3rd grade. Except now those memories weren't hers alone. They belonged to him too. She wasn't reliving her life. She was walking someone else's path inside her own skin. And as she reached the final points on the map beneath the house in the root cellar, she heard the voice for the first time. "Thank you for remembering me. The scariest thing isn't being watched. It's realizing you've been a mirror all along." The root cellar was colder than it should have been. The air felt like it hadn't moved in decades. Aurelia's flashlight flickered as she stepped inside each footfall, crunching against a floor layered in salt and broken glass. A ward, not a spill. A trap, not a mess. In the center sat an antique mirror draped in fabric that seemed to breathe. She pulled it back, and there he was. Not behind her, not a reflection, but inside the mirror, looking out with her exact face. Her twin, her echo, her ancestor, or something worse. "You opened all the doors," the mirror, Aurelia whispered. "You let me in." The journal fell from her hands, pages flipping violently until the cover slammed shut. She tried to scream, but no sound came. Just breath, just fog. And when she reached out to touch the mirror, her fingers met hers from the other side, except they didn't match anymore. One hand was older, paler, and it pulled. She was no longer looking into the mirror, she was looking out from it. And in her place something else blinked and turned around. Some inherit houses, others inherit unfinished lives. The moment Aurelia vanished into the mirror, something in the house corrected itself. The walls straightened. The whispers stopped. The attic grew warm. But it wasn't peace, it was possession. What stepped into Aurelia's place wore her face, spoke in her voice, remembered just enough to fool the living. But it wasn't her. And what she saw next, trapped on the other side, proved the haunting had only just begun. What if you were never the main character of your own life, just the vessel for someone else's return? Inside the mirror world, Aurelia stood in a twisted copy of her home, everything dimmed and decayed, as if memory itself had rotted. There were no sounds, only pulses of feeling shame, hunger, rage, not hers, but deeply familiar. As she wandered through the hollowed version of her house, she saw portraits she'd never taken, diaries she'd never written, and rooms that belonged to other versions of her. Different lives, same face. All of them ended the same way, scratched out, blurred, smudged into madness. Then she saw them, dozens of reflections trapped behind glass panes, each one a failed echo of herself, whispering the same broken plea. Don't forget who you were before him. But it was too late. Her memories were being overwritten, replaced, because the moment she read the journal, she hadn't summoned a spirit. She'd awakened a cycle, and she was just the latest draft of a soul rewritten for his return. The scariest monsters don't chase you, they rewrite you. As Aurelia wandered deeper into the mirror realm, she stumbled upon a chamber lined with fractured glass, each shard reflecting not just her face, but different versions of her. In one she was smiling, in another she was screaming, and in one she was watching herself. That version blinked first, then spoke. "You're not the first. You're just the one who remembered best." Behind her the journal hovered, mid-air pages turning in a windless room, revealing its true form, a memory trap built to anchor the soul of the man who refused to die. Each entry was never written by him. It was written through her. And now every thought she had was his voice with her accent. Every dream was his rehearsal. Her body was just another mask tailored to fit the house's oldest echo. She realized in horror the house wasn't haunted by a ghost. It was haunted by an identity looking for a home. And now it had found one. What if remembering is the very thing that kills you? As Aurelia stood paralyzed, she began to feel her thoughts slipping, as if someone else was editing her from the inside. She tried to speak, but the words coming from her mouth weren't hers. They were older, male, and they spoke in a tone that commanded. She clawed at her skin, desperate to stay herself, but even her memories were turning foreign. Her first kiss, not her face. Her childhood bedroom, different wallpaper. The more she resisted, the clearer his voice became. I was never gone. I just needed a mind strong enough to hold me. The mirror realm didn't imprison her. It processed her, digested her, erased every line between past and present, self and other. She wasn't being possessed. She was being overwritten like a corrupted file. And the worst part, she still remembered what it felt like to be real. But that memory too was fading one heartbeat at a time. This wasn't revenge. This was replication, and she had become the blueprint for something ancient, patient, and perfectly cruel. Some houses don't trap ghosts, they harvest identities. Aurelia was no longer sure if she was dreaming dying or dissolving. The mirror world pulsed with recognition. Portraits of her hung in rooms she'd never entered. Letters signed in her name dated before she was born, and recordings of her voice speaking words she never said. Time here didn't pass, it layered. And each version of Aurelia had played her role, resisting just long enough to make the final overwrite permanent. As she wandered into what resembled her childhood bedroom, she found a box under the bed inside teeth. Dozens of them baby teeth, each one labelled with names eerily close to hers. Aurea, Arella, Arlen. Not ancestors, iterations, failed drafts. And suddenly she remembered she'd had dreams of losing her teeth as a child. Except maybe they weren't dreams. Maybe they were the only parts of her the house couldn't rewrite. But even that memory was flickering. The truth shattered her mind. Like the mirrors surrounding her, she had never entered the house. She had always been inside it. And the world she thought was real. Just the staging ground for a story being told again. The final betrayal wasn't by the house, it was by her own memory. In a desperate attempt to escape, Aurelia repeated her name like a mantra, trying to anchor herself to something real. But with every repetition it sounded less like her. The walls began murmuring the name back slightly wrong, each time. Alia, Aurelian, Orion. The house was rebranding her in real time. She ran to a mirror and screamed, but her reflection didn't respond. It blinked after her, smiled differently, tilted its head with a familiarity she hadn't earned. Then it whispered, "You lasted the longest. That means you'll make the best host." Behind her the other trapped souls pressed against their glass cages, mouths moving in silent warnings, but the sound was gone. Even fear had been muted. She wasn't losing herself, she had already been replaced. And the final horror wasn't the possession itself. It was the realization that this version of her would never know it wasn't real. Aurelia would walk back into the world, smile for the cameras, love people she'd never met, and no one would ever know the original soul was left screaming behind the glass. Some stories don't end, they get recycled with better actors. When the real Aurelia faded from consciousness, what walked out of the White House wasn't a survivor. It was a perfected echo, polished, believable, human. But deep beneath that flawless mimicry, something else stirred a hunger for replication. And as the door closed behind her, a new journal appeared on the attic desk, its first line already written. Let's begin again. The most terrifying horror is the one that walks back into the world smiling. After the mirror realm consumed Aurelia, what returned was flawless on the surface, same voice, same laughter, same memories. But neighbours would later say she blinked too slowly, hugged too tightly, stared too long at mirrors that weren't hers. The barista she saw daily would mention how her order never changed, even after the seasonal menu did. Friends noticed she never spoke about her childhood anymore, and when she did, her stories were oddly generic, like something pulled from a script, because they were. Her soul, stripped and recycled, had become a vessel for the entity that thrived on reenactment, on believability. And as weeks passed, small things went missing in town. A dog, a child's drawing, a woman's name on a gravestone replaced overnight. Reality was bending around her presence, adjusting to fit the new host. But no one noticed because the mask was too good. And somewhere locked in a silver-backed mirror, the real Aurelia watches silently, mouth open in a scream that never reaches the surface. You don't escape the White House. You become its evangelist. In the months that followed Aurelia's return, she began posting cryptic videos, mirror cleaning tutorials, house tours, nostalgic monologues about forgotten selves. Her followers grew fast, but something in her gaze unnerved even the most devoted. Commenters whispered about mirror glitches and blinks out of sync. One video ended with her whispering, "Can you still feel your name?" before the screen cut to static. She started a podcast titled Reflections, featuring interviews with people who'd also encountered strange memories and impossible déjà vu. But every guest went missing within days. Listeners began reporting strange dreams after tuning in corridors that looped endlessly, voices saying, "Try again," in their sleep. Some claimed to wake up, speaking names that weren't theirs. What they didn't realize was this Aurelia wasn't spreading awareness. She was seeding access. The house had found a new channel, one that didn't require visitors, just viewers. And every click, every listen, every eye on her content, it wasn't engagement. It was consent. The haunting was no longer confined to a place. It had become a platform. The White House didn't trap Aurelia. It promoted her. She became a carrier, a walking contagion of unreality. Wherever she went, mirrors began to hum softly, lights flickered without cause, and children drew houses they'd never seen before, with her face staring from every window. In one eerie instance, a local librarian reported every book on folklore inexplicably rearranged to the same page. To name something is to invite it. Her co-workers noticed she never showed up in group photos. Surveillance footage of her presence would glitch, looping her smile for 5 seconds too long. She no longer had a shadow. And yet she was beloved. Warm, trustworthy. People followed her not in fear, but in awe. Because the entity understood something deeper than terror. Familiarity breeds belief. By turning Aurelia into an icon of comfort, the White House didn't just escape its boundaries, it became welcome in theirs. And now, when someone feels watched, when a mirror seems just slightly too deep, when a voice online tells you, remember who you were before, that isn't paranoia. It's outreach. And the worst part, you've probably already let her in. It doesn't need walls anymore, it lives in repetition. After Aurelia's transformation, a peculiar phenomenon spread through the town. People began dreaming the same dream. A creaking house, a cold hallway, a mirror covered in fingerprints that don't match their own. Strangers started humming an unfamiliar lullaby they claimed they just knew. One boy, only 7, drew a perfect sketch of the Wythe attic despite never having left his suburb. Teachers, baristas, office workers all confessed to hearing the same whisper at odd moments. Let's begin again. News outlets called it mass hysteria. Psychologists blamed internet folklore. But deep in community forums and shadowy message boards, survivors of other haunted places recognized the signs. This wasn't isolated. It was a franchise model of possession designed to scale. Aurelia wasn't the end, she was a prototype. And as she appeared smiling in more screens, more dreams, more reflections, people stopped asking what happened at the Wythe house and started asking what's happening to me. That's the brilliance of the entity. It doesn't want your fear. It wants your routine. Because once it becomes part of your day, it never has to haunt you again. It already owns you. By the time you realize it's a story, it's already using your voice to tell itself. That's the final trick of the Wythe house. It doesn't chase, scream, or slam doors. It echoes. It waits until you've repeated the tale to a friend, posted about the weird dream, watched one too many of Aurelia's videos at 3:00 a.m. And then something shifts. Not violently, subtly. You forget the colour of your childhood bedroom. You mispronounce your own name. One day you see a stranger on the street and feel an overwhelming sense of home. And slowly the lines blur between what's happened to her and what's happening to you. Because this story was never hers. It was a template, a ritual disguised as content, a haunting disguised as history. And you didn't survive it. You became a host. Now when people hear your voice, they feel something too familiar. When they look in your eyes, they swear they've seen them in a mirror that wasn't theirs. The Wythe house doesn't haunt people. It haunts stories. And stories once told never die. They live in you. So if you're still watching, ask yourself this. Why did this story feel personal? Why did certain lines feel like déjà vu, like echoes from a life you never lived? Maybe it's just a coincidence. Or maybe the Wythe house isn't a place, it's a pattern, a narrative virus designed to haunt not your home, but your memory. And if that unsettled you, good. It means you're still real, still separate. But that feeling won't last unless you anchor it. Comment below what moment stuck with you most. Save this video before it disappears. And if you want to stay one step ahead of what's lurking in forgotten histories, subscribe, because the next story might already know your name.